Welcome to the More to the Story podcast. I am so glad that you've come along. Now, some of you will know that I had a former podcast that had a different name, but a similar type of emphasis to what I do now. Now, I'm going to be issuing this month, in the month of June 2022, classic replays from that former podcast. I'll have interviews with Israel Gaither, Christopher West, Janet Dean, and then Tony and Lauren Dungy too. We'll be putting those out. Those were really fun interviews that went pretty far, and so I'm glad to share those again. You'll notice though that they don't have any video. So if you watch primarily on YouTube, you'll just hear the audio, and we'll have a picture up on the screen that you'll be able to follow as well. Now, at the end of June and the beginning of July, I'm excited that I have the opportunity to respond to some of you who've asked for some resources from me. Like, people have indicated that they often can't find small group or Sunday school curriculum that they really trust, that comes from a theology that they can trust. And so I've been excited to be able to go deeper into a study of the little book of Jude. And I've been amazed at how relevant it is for our time. Now, you might say, Jude, is that in the Bible or not? Yeah, it is. It's right before Revelation, and it's just 25 verses, but I'm offering a course that will have 6 sessions, and I have 6 bonus pieces of content as well, discussion guides for small groups, almost 5 hours of content to help people go deeper into the book of Jude. And I think you'll be amazed. I truly was surprised and pleasantly surprised how powerful this book was. And look, it's in the canon for a reason. And I think we should read it. I think we should study it. And I think when you do, I think you'll see that it has a significant power to connect to us with some of the challenge that we're facing culturally. So if you want to know more about that, go to my website, andymillerthird.com, and sign up for my email list. That's the best way to get information. Now I'll be sharing some kind of teasers of sorts in the weeks to come to get ready for that. It's going to come out the week of July 4th, and it'll be a course that you can take, and there'll be a variety of ways that you can access it. So I'm glad to offer that. So you can go to andymillerthird.com. That's andymilleriii.com. Thanks for checking out these classic replays, which will be coming out this month. It's a real treat to bring these to you. God bless you. This 5th season of Captain's Corner is sponsored by PFS Financial. That's PFS Financial. And they use biblical principles to guide you in growing and stewarding your wealth. But more importantly, PFS will guide you in fulfilling your search for significance and help you establish a legacy that will embody your passions. For more information, visit pfsfinancialfirm.com. And our thanks to the CEO of PFS, J.D. Palekia, who serves on the Tampa Area Command Advisory Board, and he's the chair of our finance committee and is a wonderful, godly man. You can hear an interview that we had with him on the 4th season of Captain's Corner. We're thankful for his team and the way they're coming alongside of us to bring you today Captain's Corner. Well, welcome to Captain's Corner. Captain Andy Miller coming to you again from Tampa, Florida, where we are privileged and honored to have on the call with us today Commissioner Israel Gaither, the former National Commander of the Salvation Army. Commissioner Gaither, welcome to Captain's Corner.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Andy, for allowing me to come to the corner with you. This is a wonderful privilege, and I really, really mean it. I'm so happy to be sharing in this conversation with you today.
Well, it's just great to hear your voice, and many people who have been involved with the Salvation Army through the years, even at kind of our community board, our board leaders probably might even recognize your voice from your leadership of the National Salvation Army, but certainly people in the Salvation Army will hear your voice, and that will bring back positive, wonderful memories of the way God used you, particularly on kind of a very public presentation level. One of the great speakers in the Salvation Army's history, and I don't mean to just say historical, I mean even now, we're just so thankful for the way God has used you. But as we get going here, I'd just love to hear what's happening with you now. How's retirement? How are you and Commissioner Eva responding to COVID-19 and those type of things?
Well, first, let me just respond to your
sure.
earlier, Andy, and just say again that how much of a privilege it is and has been to serve and continue to serve as a Salvation Army officer.
Yes.
You know, it's all about grace. I thank God for his goodness and his gracious care, compassion, redemption, blessing on my life and on Eva's and her family. It's about grace. And this is, this isn't about Israel Gaither.
Yes.
I've just been privileged to be just simply a server, somebody out of no place who was called into an extraordinary, and I mean it, extraordinary, kingdom venture called the Salvation Army. A wonderful privilege. And so it's brought us through the years. We've been retired now for 50-some years, and here we are in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Wait, you said you've been retired. You've been an officer for 50 years? You've been retired for not 50 years, maybe.
Well, let me just say that we retired having served just over 47 years.
Amazing.
As officer. Yeah. And we retired in 2010.
I got you. I understand.
So it's been a long journey, but a very blessed one, and we pray of some value to the kingdom and to the mission of the Salvation Army. So here we are in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania now, having lived here in our retirement home that we purchased 10 years ago.
Yes.
And it's just wonderful. Pittsburgh is just a wonderful community, kind of the front door to the Midwest. And
right.
So we live in a community where there are just some beautiful people, and it's not a huge metropolitan area, but it's a large one. In Allegheny County, some 300 to 400,000 people, and so we got the arts and we have sports, and it's a diverse community, and we love it. And we served in this community. We began our officer service as individual officers, single officers, even I, in Pittsburgh, and now we end up back here. We were married here as well, first child born here.
Wow.
And my home actually is Newcastle, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
It's 50 miles north of Pittsburgh. And we've served here at divisional headquarters and corps officers, and we were the divisional leaders at one time as well. So we've come back, very real sense, we've come back home.
Yes.
And it's the right time, and we're doing well as well through this COVID-19 experience. I like to say that we're cautious, we're content, and we're living under grace.
Amen.
We try to deliberately protect ourselves.
Okay.
And we take all of the necessary precautions. But one of the things, Andy, that we try to do is to protect our minds.
Okay.
From the numbing negative press that we're seeing. You put the news on, the very first headline story is how many people have died.
Right.
And that deeply concerns us. It breaks our heart, but we're not afraid.
Right.
At all.
Amen.
And we're also not held captive to thinking about all of the death, all of the negative stuff. And I also believe that God is speaking to his world. And I want to come out of this as a better husband and father and a follower of Jesus.
Amen.
I want to come out of this better than when this whole thing started several months ago. So we're doing all right.
Okay.
We're really feeling good about it.
It is an opportunity, isn't it, to take what's coming our way. Of course, we feel for those who have lost loved ones, pray for them, but this is an opportunity for a renewed focus. Yes,
indeed. And I'm telling you, not first of all, it's for me as an individual,
right.
I said. But I also believe that God is speaking a larger. There's a clarion call to the church at large.
Yes.
To believers around the world and to the Salvation Army. I believe that God is speaking. In my reflections and thinking during these times when I've had alone in my study and in prayer and looking at the Word and reading, I really want to understand something of what God is speaking and doing in his world through all of this. Um, what does it call from me as a husband and father and a server? So I'm learning and doing, and keeping busy, but in the forefront of my thinking is what is God asking? What is He saying to His Word? And I really believe that it's a call. It's a call. It's to come back to Him. That He loves His
Amen.
creation. And we've had these kind of discussions with people in the community. My next door neighbor,
right,
standing 30 feet away, his yard,
yeah,
and I in mine. He's a casual. I don't mean to be judgmental, but he's a casual believer.
right.
And we've talked about what does this mean? What is God doing? And so we've had a chance to share what we believe, what we're feeling, what we're learning. And yeah, I believe this is an opportunity for people to wake up, to understand again that this is my Father's world.
Amen.
He has not abandoned it. He loves us and carry us through this. And there's a call back to loving Him, to relationship with Him. And so we have that privilege, and on occasion seeing people to speak into their lives, to bring, a word of hope and a sense of hope into what's going on here.
Yeah. You had something interesting that you mentioned just as before we started recording, that you and Commissioner Eva have developed a mission statement for retirement even. And even now, 10 years in, that's meant some changes. And I think people will be disappointed to hear some of those changes, but I think it's important for you to, I love to hear how you express it. So describe that mission statement and how it's guided you. I know that's taken you've been on the board of Asbury University, done some other public speaking in the Army, but that's been shaped by the kind of foundation of this retirement mission statement. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. It goes back. It was about 6 or 7 months prior to retirement, and I was beginning to get nervous. What would I do? And I was kind of asking the question of God. Is there any way you can use me? What are you going to do? I just could not see myself kind of sitting around doing nothing, and I was really nervous about that. So. Even we would talk about it and spend time in prayer about it. And then all of a sudden, was far less than a year, 7 or 8 months out, I started getting some feelers. People were in contact with me about, engaging in certain ways with them. I started getting some counsel, sometimes uninvited,
yes.
To consider certain things. And so one morning before going into the office, I was doing some preparation at home, and the Lord spoke to me very strongly. I've been again saturating ourselves in prayer about what we would be doing. Now this is about 5 or 6 months out from the date of retirement. And the Lord spoke to me and began to speak, and I moved aside what I was doing on a project and just started typing. And what became of that was a 1.5 page kind of vision statement for retirement. And my wife, when she got up a short time later, I said to her, "Look, can we look at this together before we go to the office?" The Lord has spoken to me about our retirement. Said sure. So we took quite a bit of time actually, and went through it paragraph by paragraph, and it basically focuses on my commitment to continued development as a person, as a man, as a server, as a follower of Jesus, as a husband,
right,
as a father. It talks about what we might engage, how we saw engaging in ministry, what kinds of opportunities that we would both be together in, what I might do separately. And we also committed then to, after it was finally shaped over period of a couple of weeks, that every year we would look at it again and kind of tweak it.
Right.
So, for example, I'd had some offers to serve on several boards, and we determined and set it in as a foundational piece in the mission statement, the vision statement, that I would only serve on one board. So at that time, it became Asbury. I was invited to partner with a national faith-based effort that focused on pornography.
Right.
It is a strong evangelical movement in America, and so I was invited to serve with that body and be among its spokespersons, and I did that, and that required a bit of travel. So like that, in specialing and speaking, and we determined, for example, that we would not take any overseas engagements. We had several who were on the docket that came to us, and we said, we've had enough of global travel. We think it's time to concentrate on home. So that became part of it. And every year we would look at that and refine it as the Lord would lead. Within the last 2 years, my wife said to me, look, I think that maybe we ought to consider when you become age 75, that we really ought to just really, really trim back. And so we did that. It became 75 last year. We have ceased our specialing, except if it's very, very, very critical, and we can fit it into the demands of home. So we've had to turn down a number of things even within the last 6 months, and that's hard to do. It's hard to decline, but we felt we had to do that and stick to, the vision that God has given to us. So we also were engaged in pastoral care ministry in this region on behalf of the territory. We're part of the territorial team. And that was absolutely wonderful. We just relished and cherished that opportunity of engaging on a one-on-one basis with officers. And so we've done that for about 9 years, and so we've released ourselves from that as well, and now just concentrating on a few things related to ministry as we can handle them, and our home life, and kind of growing together and enjoying this phase in our lives. So the Lord has led through every sphere, every phase of our life, and we are here now at this phase, and really contented and assured and confident that this is where God wants us to be in terms of relationship to activity.
Right. And in your son, Mark, he's close by, is that right?
Yeah, Mark and his family are just about 5 minutes away.
Okay.
So, we see the grandkids. I had to go out yesterday to run an errand, and saw our oldest grandchild on his bike with some friends.
There you go.
And he saw me, and said, "Hey, Papa!" Every once in a while that kind of surprise comes up, and at a distance, we get together about once a week, and they come over and stand in the driveway, or we're out in the backyard, 25, 30 feet apart.
Right.
Spend some time with them, and our daughter Michelle and her family are in Kentucky, in Lexington, and
right.
So we're with them via Zoom and FaceTime, and we've had some family nights by way of Zoom and playing games, and so we're in touch constantly with our kids and grandkids, and every Monday morning I send the grandkids a little text to encourage them through the day, and so that's good. Even though we're not physically with them,
right.
There's a certain pain there.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we're in touch in other ways, and we can see them and talk to them.
It's beautiful how at this point in your life, and I said kind of my question, like, people be disappointed because you're not doing as much public speaking anymore, but you've been all over the world. I mean, you've served in other countries, and you've spoken, and you and Commissioner Eva have served visited all over the world, and you've had this kind of wide geographical ministry, but at the same time now it's like close in and you're able to be close to your family. I'd like to go back a little bit, and we're going back, of course, to Pennsylvania, as you said, in Newcastle, but I'd love to just hear how you became a follower of Jesus.
Well, I was raised in a home of strong faith. My dad was a Baptist preacher, and was blessed with a wonderful mother, and there were 5 of us. I have 4 siblings, all girls, all younger than me. And it was just a loving, but very, very disciplined and very strong faith-oriented home. My dad played a very strong influence on my calling. He had a profound preaching ministry. He was truly an anointed man. If he were living, his birthday will be on Monday. He'd be 107.
Wow!
And boy, I still miss him. But he was respected and valued, highly valued in the community. So I just might say as an aside, I really am an inheritor of a rich sacred legacy that left us. So the church I was raised in, my dad was the co-pastor, and interestingly enough, in Newcastle, the Union Baptist Church, over the years, the Salvation Army built a new building and relocated, and now the Army building sits directly across the street from the church in which I was raised. And I'm telling you, Andy, you cannot imagine the feeling that would come over me every time I would go to as a divisional commander, go to the local there and have a meeting there, or my wife and I especially there on a Sunday morning, and walking out of the Corps building and looking across the street at the church in which I found Christ and was raised in the faith. It's just an amazing turn of events, as only God, can orchestrate that.
Well, let's get into that a little bit. Go ahead. Do you want to add something else there?
I was just going to say my public confession of faith, now, again, influenced at home, that strong faith in Christ, and so really knowing Jesus. But the public confession of faith came in the Union Baptist Church on Sunday morning when the school superintendent knelt beside me at the altar, and I made that public confession of faith. I'll never forget. I remember the moment even as I'm describing it. Yeah. So those were the earliest days of my following Christ, becoming a believer and a lover of the Lord.
Well, I love. I've heard you talk about your dad through the years, and I just love the admiration you have for him, and like it's a goal for me. I want my kids to speak of me that way, and I'm blessed to have a wonderful father who I love and admire, and grandfathers as well. It brings up a kind of a sense like, okay, that was your dad in that Union Baptist Church, and you admired him, but somehow Israel Gaither ended up in the Salvation Army, serving in the Salvation Army all over the world. So, I mean, your path took a very different direction maybe than you could have ever imagined when you had that profession of faith. Could you talk a little bit about how you felt God calling you to serve in the Salvation Army?
Well, it's interesting. A family moved into our neighborhood. I was about 14 years of age, and a family moved in from another city in western Pennsylvania, and they were Salvationists.
Okay.
And it was a family of about 5 or 6, and there were a couple of the guys my age, and I became friends with one of them. They lived about 4 or 5 doors from us.
Okay.
And he invited me to youth activities. Now, remember, I'm attending my dad's church, very much in my father's church under his ministry. But I started going, of all things, I began to go to the Salvation Army to attend Corps Cadets.
Okay.
That was the bridge, the door. And so that led into other kinds of activities, and a year or so later that summer I worked at Camp Allegheny.
Wow.
on the staff, and then Captain Stanley Dittmer was the DYS, the Divisional Youth Secretary, and he had a profound impact on my life. He and his wife at the time, and it was there at that camp one summer as a staff person. I was a camper for a couple of years, then became a staff person. But on a Sunday morning when Captain Dittmer was preaching, I just felt the Lord speaking to me about becoming an officer. Now, unknown to me, my father and the Corps officer at the time, Brigadier James Dial, they had become very good friends through the ministerium in town. And they had often talked about me behind my back, about what God might do in my life and the direction my life might take. This was all going on behind my back for a long time. So that summer, that Sunday morning, when I felt that urge, I left then, at the end of that summer, came home, and continued to think about it and pray about it, said nothing to my parents. But I fought God. I said, I'm not sure, because I had I wanted to be a teacher.
Oh, okay.
That was my desire. And so I prayed, Lord, you've got to really prove this to me. Is this what you want me to do?
Right.
And he did. That one morning that summer was prior to returning to school for the fall session. I received a letter from a friend, a good friend with whom I had worked at camp, and on the back of the envelope, she had the great commission from Matthew 28, "Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel." And it was in her handwriting, and that was it. I knew that was God speaking confirmation to me from that verse, Matthew 28:19. Go and make disciples.
Wow.
And I accepted that at that moment on my porch, reading the back of that envelope before I even opened the card inside. That was what God wanted me. So then I told my dad a little later, a couple of days later. He and I had a time to have a little conversation privately, and I said, Dad, this is what I believe God's called me to do. And Andy, you know what he said to me?
What's that?
I already know.
Oh, wow.
I already know. And you're only affirming it. And so I had the full support of my parents, my family, and then I had to transition my membership from the Union Baptist Church to the Salvation Army, and then began, attending the Army full time with my complete support. Interestingly enough, my dad, his appreciation and understanding of the Salvation Army grew deeper and deeper, and he really became. He loves the Army so much. I remember him saying to me one time, "Son, if I knew the Salvation Army when I was coming up, believing God's call in my life, who knows, I might have become an officer."
Yeah.
But he began to serve he was invited to serve on the advisory board of the Salvation Army.
Okay.
And eventually he became the chairman of the advisory board.
Interesting.
So it was a very interesting way in which God wove his will into my life and into my calling to serve him as an officer.
It's amazing, just that beautiful support that comes. There wasn't a sense, because God was involved in your dad's own relationship with Christ at that point, that you were diverting from your family. You weren't leaving your family. Instead, you had the full support of them as you went off. And so this was a fairly young age, and in those days, more people went in at a young. I mean, were you 18, 19 years old when you went to training?
Just turned 18.
Wow.
Because I was on my way to college.
Right.
Was looking forward to that. Actually, I turned 18 in training.
Wow.
So it was really, and in those days, as you say, it was more common than not to have younger. I was the youngest male in my session and the second youngest in the session.
Wow.
So yeah, that was very just very, very interesting. And I'm not so sure that if I were making the decision myself, if I had that kind of faith, I probably wouldn't have done that.
Right.
But it was a strong, very, very strong urging, and all of the evidences around me affirmed that this is what I ought to, needed to do with my life. There was no choice, actually. Right. It was what God was asking me to do. And then the confirmation and the support of my parents. And there were a couple of my session mates who, because they had a calling on their life to be officers and chose to pursue that, were rejected by their family.
Yes.
There were one or two in our. So I never took for granted the support I had from my folks.
Wow. So I'd love to fast forward a bit, and I'm sure there's some things we could learn from your time in training, but you end up getting appointed back to Western Pennsylvania. But it was in that period where you met Commissioner Eva, and could you talk to us just about your coming together and what challenge that represented as an interracial marriage for the Army at that time?
Yeah, Eva and I were session mates.
Oh, okay.
She from Sydney, Ohio,
mm-hmm.
a small town just north of Dayton, and we were in the same session. We were friends, casual friends, but we were both commissioned to different appointments back here in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
And she assisting at the Corps on the eastern end of the city, and I was in the northern sector of the city of Pittsburgh. Okay. And it just so happened that the Corps officers with whom we were assigned were good friends.
Okay.
And they would often, wonderful people, and they would often get together, and so they would invite us to come along, with them for their fellowship in each other's homes and different activities. And so we said, okay, we'll do that. Well, then that drew us closer together, and out of that our friendship deepened and love blossomed. So wow. We then indicated to our leaders that we were interested in what they called at the time official engagement.
It's funny, those terms from those days.
Yeah. You had to have permission then, see. This is an army. So that launched into a real significant issue for the Salvation Army.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
At the time, there were no other interracial officers in the Salvation Army in America.
Mm-hmm.
There was one interracial couple in the training college in Chicago who were interested in each other, and they were forbidden their relationship, and they had been asked to leave. Their cadetship terminated. Now, happily, they moved some years later after they married. They moved into the eastern section of the United States, into the Eastern Territory, and remarried and regained their rank and were commissioned, and they served well.
Wonderful.
At this point, there really was no active Salvation Army officers who were pursuing an interracial relationship and who wanted to serve as an officer. So this was a challenge to the Army.
Mm-hmm.
I think in our path was then Brigadier John Waldron.
Yes.
And he believed us, believed in us.
Yes.
Our divisional commander, and followed us closely. Was a wonderful. He was one of 7 men in my life who influenced me deeply, profoundly. And so he took the chance and said, okay, we'll just see how this goes before we give approval for your engagement. And a short time later, it was approved. He could do that. So then the question of, okay, the marriage. So there was some testing that he wanted to see. He was having conversations with the territorial leadership. And so they moved Eva out of Pittsburgh. At the time now, then I was in Aliquippa opening a corps.
Okay.
And they moved her to Erie, Pennsylvania, in charge of what was then a Scandinavian corps.
Okay.
She went as a corps officer there. So now we're, rather than 15 minutes away from each other, we are now an hour away.
Interesting. Wow.
And so he wanted to see if this would really last, if this meant something. So after a year and a half or so, 2 years, obviously it did last. It was for real.
Yes.
So Eva was moved back to Pittsburgh in charge of the same corps to which she had been previously appointed to assist out of training. And by the way, an African-American dominated corps. And I'm in Aliquippa opening a corps in a cross-cultural setting with no blacks, ministering to a white congregation. The Salvation Army struggled with this, approving the marriage.
Yeah.
I understand later from the official records, to which I then had opportunity to see, that the request would not be undertaken by the territory. They passed it on to international headquarters.
Wow.
At international headquarters, they kicked it back, not wanting to make the decision, to the territory. The territorial leadership kicked it back to the desk of John Waldron.
Oh, interesting.
And said to him, look, we're going to leave this to you. You know the couple, and we'll leave it to you. If you agree, that's fine with us, but there must be certain understandings. And one of the things that John Waldron told us that he was told as he considered the case was that we were to be told that there would probably come a day when there would be no more appointments for us, and that we would probably have to then resign our officership.
Wow.
Little did they know. And it was daunting at that time.
I'm sure.
But we prayed it through and felt, no, this is what God has called us both individually to be Salvation Army officers.
Right.
God has called us into marriage, and so now we're going to stay the course. And John Waldron, in essence, said, good, I'm on your side, I'm with you.
Wow.
He then, along with my father, actually presided at our wedding.
Okay.
Pittsburgh, and what a marvelous experience and event that was.
I didn't know about John Waldron's influence on your life until I read Henry Garapi's biography of you, and and so that was really interesting to me, because I'm not somebody who, I don't know, he might have been promoted to glory by the time I was born, but of course his influence has stayed on with all of the volumes he's edited and all the things he's put together on Salvation Army thinking and theology. And so it's interesting that this person who's really, his influence continues to this day through his writing, but also through you. Yeah. And I'm just so glad to hear his name brought up here, and the courage that he took as a divisional leader in believing in you. I think that's one of the beautiful things that can happen in the Salvation Army is if we can drive things back to the local level as much as possible, I think generally we get a better answer.
Yeah, because we're closer to where that issue lies,
right?
To their greatest impact is, and he was just he was a man who was greatly valued among leadership and in the day, and officers in general. He was very well respected. He and Helen, his wife, they just they just had this depth of understanding and wisdom and anointing. He was a wonderful leader, and he was brave. He was courageous. He told us sometime after our wedding, he said to us, Eva and Izzy, I want you to know that I took some abuse in supporting you.
Wow.
He had gotten some letters from a few leaders around the world that were disparaging and really were against the position he took in support of us. So he was very courageous, and I might add that then later he dedicated our first child, and forever we are grateful for the strong influence and impact and support standing by us.
Right.
When few others were willing to do so. We're actually reluctant, and perhaps I might even say afraid to do so.
Right.
Given the era in
right.
which we were at that time.
And this would have been the late 60s? Is that the idea about the time?
Yeah. Yes, we were married in 1967.
Okay.
One month, interestingly enough, after the Virginia Loving case struck down and interracial marriage was allowed in Virginia. It was 1 month after that event. So it was a different time in America, and we even had to face some issues within the Army.
Mm-hmm.
Now, during that era, I might say, and I grew up on the edge of the civil rights era. I grew up in Newcastle at that time, when there was a colored YMCA and a white YMCA.
Okay.
The white YMCA had the indoor pool and the gymnasium. The colored YMCA was a kind of a large house with a pool table, and outside was the basketball court. We had to on many a winter day, had to shovel the snow to play basketball on a decent day.
Mm-hmm.
At the edge, the edge of all of that, and so in that time, it was a difficult thing, but it was subtle. There was a subtleness about the disapproval and disengagement and how people felt. But there were occasions, a few, when even I had to face it outrightly. We found out later, again, when I was in a position to look at my records very, very closely, our records.
Right.
We found out that there was an appointment that we were refused to be accepted into by the divisional commander precisely because of our interracial marriage status.
Wow.
And we'd often wondered why we were not appointed to that division, because it was, it was cross-cultural. It was a lot of African Americans, and it was. We often wondered about that. It was a metropolitan area.
Yeah.
And now we know why.
Interesting.
And I dare say, had we known that as a young married couple, you and I probably would not be having this conversation.
Interesting. It would have been so hard on you to realize that was what had happened. You might have even left. I mean,
exactly.
Officers, yeah.
We'd have opted to do something else if we knew that we were in this kind of organizational environment where such racial prejudice and bias and discrimination existed. So, but we knew it was there,
right?
And we're part of the, we're part of the group of black officers calling attention to it from our leaders. But we didn't know the personal impact to that degree in that instance on personally.
One of the interesting things is with your ministry in general, like you've become a representative often of African officers of African descent in the United States, and you've been the first black officer to do many things, and that takes courage and is a pioneering spirit on your part. As I was reading your biography, I learned. I knew many of those first, but I didn't know about some of the commissions that you were a part of. I didn't know. You even formed a response while you were appointed in New York to James Cone's Black Liberation Theology. There was you had to. This is a regular theme that's been a part of your ministry. I'd love to hear just a general way how you've. We've already been there a little bit, but just dealing with the question of race, and particularly I'm interested even in your response to James Cone too.
Yeah. Of course, that was a prominent thought in the religious sector of Cone's Black Liberation Theology, and I used to say, and still do, we don't leave who we are as individuals and step into an organization. In other words, I didn't leave my black heritage, what I grew up with when I became a Salvation Army. It was still part of me. There are things that I still strongly believe, and God has been so good in giving me a platform to share with others on this matter of race and how we handle that within the Salvation Army. In some days, back in that era, we were, I really believe we were organizationally reluctant receivers of a new reality that was coming.
Wow.
America was going to change, and that there was some risk that the Salvation Army organizationally must take,
right,
or we'd be left behind. We'd be a mere shadow today of what we were meant to be if we didn't take those risks and move on. Another thing that occurs to me just now is that it took a new generation of leaders who would be willing to take those risks. There were very, very few John Waldrons in the late 60s, civil rights era. Very few of men like him. So internally, a few years went by, and we see more and more blacks coming into the Salvation Army as officers, declaring themselves, and coming in with this fervor and this desire to really serve the Lord in their calling as officers. But there grew a kind of a disquieting discomfort within the ranks of the black officers. There was a concern with the lack of not only just recognition of individuals and where we could serve,
right?
Because at that point it was believed that black officers could only serve in certain communities.
Right.
Called it the Chitlin Circuit.
Yes, I've heard that.
When you become an officer, you knew there was only going to be 5 or 6 places. That was what was intimated. Our marriage, was
by John Waldron,
discussed. There are only a few places in this circuit.
Right.
Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Philadelphia, New York. So we felt it important to sit together, black officers, and talk about these things, because there was this uneasiness.
Right.
We had this struggle going on in civil society beyond the Salvation Army.
Right.
It was impacting the Salvation Army, but nobody was talking about it.
Wow.
But it wasn't being made an impact. So we asked the administration during one commissioning weekend if we could meet the black officers and have this discussion, to which the answer was no, we cannot. So we were actually under the leadership of a prolific man, Brigadier B. Barton McIntyre, who at the time was the Corps officer for the Harlem Temple Corps. Immensely respected man. He was actually a Canadian.
Okay.
Of African heritage descent.
Okay.
And he and his wife were just wonderful, wonderful people. They were our leaders. So he became our spokesperson and made the plea for reconsideration. So the administration at the time said, all right, they can meet, but they will not be sanctioned. There would be no reimbursement for any expense might be incurred. You're on your own. So we had to find the place, arrange for a meal. It was during a lunch hour, and have our meeting. And out of that grew issues that we felt needed to be talked about further and discussed further. Now, as a result of that first meeting and those issues, we now see the various committees on a territorial level broadly, widely accepted, several committees, in fact, now representing several populations of people of color that are making a significant impact, not just on programming and personnel, but on policy, how we move and have our being as an organization in this territory. So, so there are still challenges that face us, but we've come a long way from that period. But it took the strength and the courage of top-level leaders in the Army. It also took the determined courage within holding firm to our commitment to be Salvation Army officers and be faithful to this movement it took us,
Mm-hmm.
and others like us, to be willing to engage and to listen and to hear hard, sometimes disappointing and sometimes hurtful things.
Right.
But here we are today, a better Salvation Army.
Yeah. How do you think we're doing as a Salvation Army on this matter? I mean, obviously there's massive improvements in the number of people who are serving, particularly as officers. But I think like some of my colleagues who are African American, have still some concerns with how things are going with the Army, particularly as it relates to leadership and kind of like the recognition of having less than ideal number of leaders in service. I imagine you get that question every now and then. I mean, how do you help us? How can you help us think through that?
Yeah, it's a tough one. It really is. First of all, we need to recognize and understand that America is regionalized.
Right.
Secondly, that the Eastern Territory, the Eastern sector of the country, and the Salvation Army administration, we had a leg up on this because at that time in the Civil Rights era, we were making strides in the eastern section of the country that other parts of the country were not.
Mm-hmm.
So there was an attraction to the Salvation Army by African Americans to a degree that others had not experienced. So we were kind of ahead of the game.
Right. Right.
Yet we had to fight through some things. When I was coming up, it wouldn't have been possible for me as an individual officer, or for Eva and I, particularly as an interracial couple,
mm-hmm.
To serve in the South. See, so first of all, we need to frame it in that context,
right,
to get an appreciation for where we are today. Now, today, the struggle continues. I mean, there's just so much that goes into this thing.
Yes.
And I'm pleased on the one hand to say that I know some African American officers in the South who are magnificent leaders.
Yes.
In every stretch of the imagination. Now, some things have to open up. There has to be a commitment to their continued development.
Right.
As it is for all officers, there needs to be an intentional end desired for officers and where they can make the difference. So some strategic planning has to be done. And again, I want to say it's for all officers, but
yes,
particularly for officers of color.
Right.
And there has to be some risks taken, as I inferred earlier.
Yes.
To place people in and take some risks. Now, one of the things, interestingly, Andy, when we were coming up together, the first 3 appointments to staff responsibilities, headquarters responsibilities, the first thing that I presented to my leaders when we got our appointments was, why are you doing this? The first question 3 times. Why are you doing this? And I answered my own question in a way by saying, if you're doing it because I'm black, I'm not interested in that appointment.
Interesting. Wow.
Not interested. I said it 3 times in the first 3 staff appointments. Don't place us there if you're doing this because I'm not interested in being showcased. I'm not interested in being in a window and being your poster child.
Wow.
And, I was assured that, no, they believe that we, together, and I, had something that they needed,
yes,
something to offer. So after the 4th and 5th one, I stopped asking the question,
Well, it was evident that, and I think that your own ministry and the fruit would have been evident that would have, maybe even to your own soul, you'd have a sense that, yeah, this is right for me to be here, and maybe even your own interaction with them would have known that it wasn't some affirmative action quota system that was making that happen. That it was people knowing Izzy and Eva and knowing that they were the right people for these appointments.
Yeah, and I, again, what do we do now? What must we do? Well, it's very complicated. It's not an easy answer, but we need to first of all identify people by early on seeing traits and giftedness.
Yes.
and levels of commitment. We need to see that early on, and then deliberately, intentionally develop and have a strategic placement plan.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's hard to do given the nature of our organization.
Yes.
But it can be done. May I diverse just a minute?
Please. Yeah.
To Southern Africa when we were there.
Yeah.
We faced much the same, although it was, we faced much the same challenge, and God spoke very keenly and strongly to me about this. And I had colleagues, fortunately, who were the right people in the right place to be with us, who shared that, both black and white South Africans.
Mm-hmm.
We felt the need to begin to identify that when we arrived, there had only been one South African, white South African, who had the privilege of getting out of South Africa. Now they were banned from movement globally because of apartheid, and it had just broken just several years prior to our arrival. So here we had the majority of our Salvationist population and officer population,
right.
The majority were black.
Right.
But when, as a territorial leaders, when Eva and I sat in board meetings, I'd chair a board meeting, I'm sitting around only seeing white South Africans.
Wow. Yeah.
Now something's wrong with this picture.
Right.
So what we were able to do with the help of funding from the Eastern Territory was to really launch a sophisticated, deep identification and training and development program for officers.
Right.
We had to be very careful because we just didn't want it to appear as it was only for black officers, but for all officers.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were able to launch that, and in our 4 years, begin to really get into that. And I thank God that I can now look back, and there are several black Salvation Army, black African officers who are in key territorial
yes.
and international appointments who came through that program, who were there when we had the privilege of serving, and we saw them, were able to identify them, saw them, and my colleagues and I, and engaged them in this learning and development and training process.
Yes.
And they're now serving in absolutely key appointments, and several others then who were able to go internationally. The point is, I'm not patting myself on the back.
No, I don't hear that.
Is God doing this? My point is that there has to be, we can do this. Early identification.
Yes.
Early interventions and significant intentional training
yes.
and development. And then looking out where we want to see, how we want to see movement of our leaders within the organization. It is possible to do.
Yeah, it's ensuring that, just correct me if I say something wrong, it's ensuring that opportunity is truly available for every person. And I love how you're able to now look back at Southern Africa, and you have the advantage of time. And you can look and see how what the long game has produced. But of course, in the moment in South Africa, that was an immediate hard decision. That you'd have debate, discussion, and you had to make that call. But the fruit that has come from that, it's amazing to think about how
That's
God
right.
led you in that moment.
That's right, and I don't want to underplay the risks associated with it. I mean, we really had to, because we had black South African officers who had the innate ability and skill, but didn't have the training nor the development applied to them to bring that out. They were disadvantaged
Right.
in their coming up. So there was some risk. We would see here are some traits. Now, what can we exploit for God and the mission, the kingdom here? How can we help to release these beautiful gifts and the strength of leadership? How can we release that? And also taking our place alongside them. We came into an environment where if you were believed, no matter whether it was civil society or no matter what
sector,
element of the population of the society, what strata you were in, if you were believed and you were the leader, people would do anything that you wanted. I mean, it was just that kind of society. And so sitting in board meetings, I would say, perhaps we ought to do this. What do you think? Oh, whatever you want, Commissioner.
Oh, interesting.
And I'd say, no, this is not what I want.
Right.
That's what's God calling us as a body to do. So we had to face that. People who, though they were in the majority, they were not in control. And they'd come up in a time, in an era, when they were just forced to the back. I mean, brutally, physically, spiritually, intellectually. They were beaten down.
Yes.
Some of that still lingered. And there was a wonderful, I think she's now retired, single woman officer. Tremendous poise, but strength of character, love for the Lord and the Army. She was in an appointment running a very large school home for children. And I'll never forget, in an officer's council, the Lord broke through.
Wow.
And Major Jawili made her way to the altar.
Wow.
Eva slipped up beside her
and
said, tell me, Lena, how are you doing? Now, this is a black African woman at that point in her 50s.
Yeah.
Talking to her white leader. And she said, I hate them. I hate them.
Wow.
And Eva said, what do you mean? She said, I hate these white officers for what they've done to me. Oh, what a moment that was. When God broke through. And now this woman was highly respected, highly regarded, but she was she had not yet shaken her past. What had happened to her? The healing had not been complete. There were scabs, sores, they were oozing. And God did a marvelous work in Major Jawili's life that morning, officers' councils.
Amazing.
And she went on to serve more freely, more liberally among her white brothers and sisters. That was a marked moment for us.
Yes. I love how you bring that in, because one of the things that can be missing from some of our discussions that end up, focusing on the sociological realities that are present and the way to combat them is we can get into discussions about critical theory, intersectionality, all these things, systemic issue. I'm not knocking any of that, but the Christian perspective, what the Christian message brings is what you just described, is forgiveness. Yes. This is a part of the cure. And now this doesn't mean that we ignore sin where it has clearly happened.
Yeah.
But we still we're all in need of forgiveness.
But also, you see, we have to be willing to step into the story of others. I mean, and make, to the degree that we make ourselves vulnerable. It's very, very interesting. Eva became vulnerable on her knees with the major.
Yes.
At the altar. However, Major Jawili saw Eva differently. Because Eva was not a white South African. Eva was a white American coming in,
Right.
So, and yet, Eva shared some of that pain that Lena was going through. See? So there's a vulnerability. There's an exposure of our own thinking, of our own thoughts, of our own heart, when we're willing to step into the story and learn just a little bit more about what people have been through, what they're carrying. Remember, we don't leave who we are when we out of the world into the training college and accept our, sign our covenant to be officers, we are still who we are, but God has to do a marvelous work in us.
Yes.
So we step into their story and help them toward that healing. So we got to be willing to do that.
Yes.
With the individuals that we're seeing. It's not, it's really very heart-rending and loving really in the way that Jesus has called us to love and to feel as he called us to feel.
Yes.
He's our model.
I mean, I've had that challenge here recently, even over the past several years, as there have been nationally recognized tragedies, sins, killings,
yeah.
And even just recently, I'm not sure when this podcast will come out, but we're still like within a week of the Ahmaud Arbery killing, and right, not but 4 hours from where I am right now. And I think what I'm trying to do, but I mean, I still need to listen better. I mean, this is in general, but to recognize that what we bring to who we are changes our situation. And I have two boys who are 13 and 11, and I would, if they were African American, I would be having to have different conversations with them about how they play in a neighborhood where they might be a minority. That's different. And I have to, like you're saying, try to get into the story to hear the pain. And I've served in a very multi-racial corps, and to recognize how there's boys the same age as my boys, and there are different conversations. And I need to try to empathize so I can serve, I hope. But I know that like, I almost sound like I shouldn't be saying this because I feel like I'm saying I figured something out, and I feel like I still have so much to hear and learn. So with these type of situations that are, in a sense, like they're a social concern for our society in the United States. I mean, how should the Army respond in these type of situations, like with the Ahmaud Arbery situation?
I do believe that there is a position of service, of love. There's a word that we can speak. There's a presence that we can bring into these kinds of situations, into this one.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe that. The tightrope that we're walking in a windstorm is that these things become so politicized.
Right.
And we have to be certain, and I believe we're called to do this, is to be apolitical, and to bring in yet truth.
Right.
Speak truthfully. Speak for justice.
Right.
And I think that this is, as I've read and viewed the reports on this as recently as early this morning, new information still comes out, but we have to stand for truth and justice. I believe that if Jesus were present, walking today as our Lord,
yes,
he would call for that.
Yes.
I believe that. He would call for that, truth, justice. Now, how we do that is that's where the difficulty comes. The challenge is. Let me suggest a couple things.
Oh, I'd love to hear it. Yes.
I think we need to speak unafraid.
Right.
And speak with our organizational integrity. The Salvation Army is listened to across this country. We can prove that we know what we're talking about because of who we are as a myriad people,
right,
who populate the Salvation Army. So we can talk about truth and righteousness and justice and respect and value and honor. We can do that because that's who we are. We can prove that. So, I think that, I could envision the Salvation Army speaking through some means with our varied racial representation,
right,
on the platform and speaking into this as a people. Now, what do we speak to? We obviously speak. We can speak to the rightness and the wrongness and the call for justice, but we can talk about, look, here's who we are,
yes.
and we're prepared to come alongside this family,
right.
Ahmed's family, and we're prepared to speak hope. We're prepared to do that. Here's what the Bible says about justice and how justice ought to be applied. Here's how authorities ought to be looking at this from a biblical perspective.
Yes.
What would Jesus, how would he judge this situation? And we can talk about that, you see, because we have that experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think we also can employ responses that speak strongly about the higher and the better way to live as together. What we don't want to do is take actions that will prove to be worse than the problem.
Right.
See? And so that's why it's kind of being on a high wire in a windstorm.
What would be some of those actions that would be worse than the problem? Well,
for example, I think if we were to participate, if we had Salvations participating in a strike, well, not a strike, but a protest
right.
of some sort that could have the potential of becoming violent, I'm not so sure that our message or the rightness of it, the beauty of it could be heard clearly, because we would divide, separate people. On the other hand, where there is a memorial service,
right,
a gathering to pray, or we might instigate that. We might say, we might call for that from a community, because we have the veracity, we have the validity. We can do that. We
yes.
can say, look, let's have this community come together. Let's bring the Arbery family
yes.
together. We're going to pray. Let's do this, and then let's talk about it. Let's speak about it. We can do that kind of thing. See, and I mean in a meaningful way. Not. And I'm not saying this is invalid, but not just only saying this kind of thing has to stop. Blah blah blah. But we can talk about the why of it.
Yes.
See, why does it really happen? Is this true? Yes, it is true.
Yes.
So I think those are a couple of examples of things
this.
that we can do. And I'm.
Let me interrupt you for a second, and I hesitate to do that. Then people are probably like, "Andy, stop talking. Every time you talk, you're getting in the way." So I just, I think this is so powerful in this moment, because I asked you to do this interview before this hit. Before the news, before I saw the news, maybe obviously the very unfortunate piece of justice, and we just pray that those who are investigating this from the federal and state level are kind of realizing why it took so long for there to be a response. And that's a whole piece of another layer of injustice. But hopefully, the rule of law will enable this all to be exposed.
Right.
But I didn't know that I thought I was just going to talk to you about your history and some of the other things that God's led you to do. But I just am so thankful for this moment, and I look forward to sharing it, even if it's just the people in the congregation where Abby and I serve, to be able to share these ideas. There's this interesting piece too that I want to go back to, like when you said the things to do and not to do. I love this image of and everybody can do that in their local community when something maybe not to this national news level arises. I remember one time you said at a commissioning event to a group of new officers, the thing they should do first is take a walk, not to send an email, right? Like get outside and go see. And there's a way we could respond as in uniform publicly to these situations. Let me go ahead. I'll let you respond to that. I have one more piece on the racial item I'd like to cover too.
Well, no, I think it's right. See, again, we're in the community and we're serving, but we've got more power than our voice and our presence has much more power than I sometimes think we realize. And I think that there may be times and situations where we are reluctant to use the authority that God has given us, that God has granted us, the authority of our presence and the authority of our voice. And it may be because, and rightly so, I understand this, because of everything becomes so politicized.
Right.
Everything. And it's so hard to stand that middle ground without falling into the political traps that are there. But nonetheless, if we speak to these things from a biblical perspective as followers of Jesus,
yes,
what is Jesus calling us to do? Jesus is calling us to give food, to bring material sustenance, but he's also calling us to step into the lives of people like this family that's devastated and hurting.
Right.
Calling us to do that, see, as well. Calling us to walk through communities where there is injustice, where there is this hatred below, where you might not feel comfortable in walking through the community, but he's calling us to walk in those places.
Right.
Just as Jesus would do.
Yes.
And to walk boldly, wearing our uniform, hand in hand with those who don't look like us, who don't talk like us,
Yes.
And demonstrating by our presence and our voices and our movements that it is possible, it really is possible to live and to make this a just society.
Yes, amen.
And I might also say one other thing. We cannot be afraid when we speak to call out evil, to call out sin, to call out wrong, to call out injustice. Now, we do that. We really do that. We do these things around the world, and quite frankly, in some places in the world, we're doing it with great effectiveness, perhaps even much more so than we're doing it in America. But to speak into the world and exposing and calling out biblically, from a biblical foundation, not from what we feel as individuals, not because we feel assaulted in our own soul, though we do, but that doesn't drive it. Right. What drives is really a larger purpose. See, I've been through this. I've as a youngster, but also as a Salvation Army an adult. I know what it means to be targeted because I'm black.
Yeah.
I remember it's been several years ago. We were in Florida for a family vacation. Of our kids and grandkids had gathered, and Eva and I arrived at the location we were staying ahead of time, about 4 or 5 hours ahead of the rest of them. And so it was my charge to go out to the grocery store and get groceries. So I'm dressed down, and look like any other tourist, and I walk into the grocery store and get my groceries and pile up the cart and pay for them, and I'm on my way out. As I'm on my way out, one of the staff persons from the grocery store calls me aside, pulls me out of there are probably 10 or 12 folks right beside me, white people, and he calls me out. Wants to see my receipt.
No, wow.
And prove that I paid for the groceries. So I said, no.
Oh, wow.
Here's my receipt. I paid for these. I'm an honorable man, but I want to see the manager of the store. And I want to see that person now.
Wow.
So that began a chain of events that had the second person, I forget what the title was, of that chain of grocery stores, along with their attorney, call me, separate calls. The only reason why the president of the company did not call was explained to me that they were in a shareholders meeting. But I used my voice as a person to speak and to call out that injustice.
Wow.
Because I felt very strongly, I knew that I would, and they agreed.
Wow.
Their top people agreed. Now, as a result of that, their policy changed, and I was assured Lord that was going to happen, and still pray it's in play. The point is, we have voices.
Yes.
We can speak, and we can speak from truth. We can speak from relevance. But even if we don't, we can speak from a biblical, passionate love that calls for truth and justice and fairness.
Amen.
In other words, Andy Miller doesn't have my experience as a black man.
Right.
But you still have a responsibility to speak from what you know to be right.
Right.
See, and so it calls for that, I think, from us individually as followers of Jesus.
Yes.
As well as organizationally with a powerful voice.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being willing to share that story, and also apply it to this very situation for us speaking out. I'm interested how you said, probably not something the Salvation Army should be a part of protest. And there might be some people who are listening now like, oh man, I really wish we would. And let me just back up a little bit in your history to your time in New York. And that would be a little bit of the difference probably to the way, like your very reasoned biblical response to Black liberation theology in James Cone. Like that would be a difference. Like he would say, no, like we need to stand up for this. We need to fight in a public protesting sort of way. Could you just distinguish a little bit like how you've kind of wrestled through that side of the Christian witness?
Yeah. I believe that there's a way in which we can speak firmly, deeply, without violence.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I believe that somewhere between Cone and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Yes.
I don't believe that I need to stand in a protest. In fact, I don't think that my individual voice and presence is felt and heard as effectively as if I'm standing in front of somebody in an office, at a board table, behind a desk, facing that individual or individuals. So I believe that the power of influence and change does not necessarily have to be in the form of protests that can become violent. And interestingly enough, if you examine the progress of the civil rights movement, you will note that beginning in the 60s, and we saw the impact and served in the impact of violent protests.
Yeah.
I mean, I watched from our front door on top of a hill of our quarters at that time, flames erupting all over the Pittsburgh Homewood section. And, so I know what that means. Now, today, you may have marches, but you don't have generally that kind of protest. Right. Now, we've seen evidences of that, in our time within the last year even.
Sure.
But that's not the general approach.
Right.
It's a more reasoned approach, and I respect Dr. Cone and the theology of the era, but he was a forceful, forthright libertarian, and really felt strongly about this subject. I feel strongly about it as well, but I don't think we change things by engaging in strong protest that could lead to violence, because what it does, it shuts off people.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to get people to change if you turn them off?
Wow. Yeah.
You get them to listen if they close their eyes and ears to your voice that's coming. And why do we need to reduce ourselves to the kind of unjust behavior that's been thwarted on us?
Right. Interesting.
See, that just doesn't make sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
If I want to disarm you, I'm going to disarm you with reason.
Right.
I'm going to disarm you that way. I'm not going to disarm you if I pick up the same battle tools that you throw at me that you pick up against me. I'm not going to disarm you. Not at all. I believe, and I have seen, that the disarming factor comes when I throw something up against you that you're not really expecting. See? I disarm you that way. And
Yes.
so my own personal philosophy is that for me, others may feel differently, but for me, that's what I believe is my best way of making my voice heard by my presence and voice. But I also believe that's the way organizationally.
Yes.
And I think that's the way also we, personally speaking, we retain and perhaps even go deeper in terms of our integrity in America as we serve. So I think there's more that we can do, ought to do.
Yeah.
But I think we also need to be very, very careful how we do it.
Right.
How we do it, but we got to make sure we're doing something because we're losing the power and the strength of our voice and our presence.
Right. When we say nothing, we have to do something. I think what is interesting is what you're saying could also just be applied to general organizational leadership in general, and how, okay, let's just say my particular situation at this very moment, trying to come back from COVID-19, we're probably going to have 2 services. Well, there's a contingent in the congregation that says we should have a contemporary service and a traditional service, and it's actually the traditional side that's pushing the hardest. And at the same time, when I was that's not what we would hope. We want to have we hope for a different result, not to separate things out.
Yeah.
But I have to be able to figure out, I can't just come in and bash them over the head and say, aren't you nuts for thinking that? Why do you want to separate from all the younger people? I mean, that's going to get me nowhere. And say, how do I come in to really listen and then influence change is the only way that we're going to get to a positive result.
Yeah, it's, leading, particularly in the turbulent times in which we're living, is such a challenge. And it really does take grace, the grace of our Lord anointed on us, serving under that grace, being able to listen, being recipients of the wise counsel of the Holy Spirit. And I know it's for you as it is for many, many others, and it certainly has been for me. When I've been in those kinds of situations, I've just really, in the midst of the conversation, I'm saying, Lord, Holy Spirit, speak to me now. Tell me what I'm to say next.
Yes.
You want to be wise, but you also, because you're a leader, you're the leader.
Yeah.
You have to be firm in what you believe is truth and right. See, but to have that ability, the anointing, really of God, to show you how then to bring the divergent voices and beliefs together. See?
Yes.
And by the way,
yeah,
if I may,
yes.
I don't want to throw you off, but I think that's also relates to the broader scope of the mission of the Salvation Army.
Okay.
I think if I may just make a comment about that.
Please, yes.
We know what our mission is. It's been articulated. It's in our buildings. It's on signboards.
Yes,
it's in our publication. See, but what's the end? What's the end? What's the end result? What is it? Why are we doing this good work, which is in essence our mission? It is because there's a kingdom intentional purpose. This is about the kingdom of our Lord.
Amen.
And these things that we do, these engagements that we undertake, they're paths to the coming reign of Christ.
Amen.
See, this is kingdom intentional. So if we have a mission mindset, it's got to be tied to and remembered when we're doing our work, that this is for a kingdom purpose. See, and I think sometimes we may get so caught up.
Yes. Preach.
In our missional work.
Yes.
In the doing, and doing it very good and very well, that becomes the end all. But I really have tried to remember that the greater purpose that's driving this good mission work is the kingdom of God.
Amen.
And trying to apply that in my own thinking and my own leading. to look beyond that. We can get really caught up in minutia, or we can get caught up in these bigger issues that are confronting society, and we wonder what should we do, what should we say. Well, let's do and say linked to this mission-minded set that it's all about the kingdom of our Lord.
Yes.
It's not about just today, it's about tomorrow. It's about the preferred future.
Yes.
And I think that keeping that in mind influences how I lead, and what I say. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely. I love it. And I think that it ultimately then it becomes so much bigger. As much as you and I both love the Salvation Army, have been entrenched in it, and in a sense given our lives to God through it, at the same time it's so much bigger than just the army. It's a kingdom purpose. It's about the restoration of all things and the wiping away of every tear from every eye, and the lion lying down with the lamb, this big picture of where all creation is going. So that's so much better than just the as important as organizations are, just the organizational minutia, as you said.
And isn't it possible to lead that way? Can't you lead that way? You're the interviewer, I'm the interviewee. So.
I'll take it. Yeah, I want to. I'll keep going. Yeah. But
it is possible. It's hard work. It's challenging. It really is. But that's the way we've got to see what we're doing, and the reason, the purpose of our doing that. That there's a. It's someone was saying in a conversation. This is about building a better world. All right, that's fine. I think this is about transforming people and places. The kingdom reign is about transformation.
Right.
It's more than better.
Right.
It's far more than better.
Yeah.
This is transforming work. And it happens in people, and it happens in places. By the way, my view of the power of the church, and in specifically the Salvation Army, and why I'm so big and high on the Salvation Army in the world and what we've been called to do and to be and do, is because of the South African experience. I came out of that experience with believing some things about the power of the Salvation Army that I never believed was possible before we went. Because of what I saw. Because of what I saw happening in communities and in homes.
Yes.
And in individual lives.
And its influence in society, doing the exact things that you talked about, how we could respond here by speaking unafraid, by speaking truth, and speaking like I love those 3 points that you made. This I just want to highlight, like you also served. I wanted to go through just your points. So I don't have time to ask the other questions I sent you. Or you don't. I appreciate every minute you've given me. But after you went to the United States Eastern Territory for just a short time before you were called upon by General John Larson to serve as the International Chief of Staff, and then came back to the United States to serve as the National Commander here. As I'm hearing you talk about South Africa, this is my little plea, and I think there'll be many people saying amen to it. While I would love it if you could write your experience down of what happened in South Africa, and so that it'll be available. And I know you have a very gifted daughter who's a great communicator. I was at Asbury Seminary while she was director of communications there. Maybe she could help you get. I would just love it to have. I know people will be able to YouTube you and maybe see videos of you throughout generations, but you've been an amazing gift to the world in the Salvation Army, you and Eva both. By God's grace, as you started this whole piece out, this whole interview out, it wasn't about you, but there's a certain way that you communicate that I think, I pray you're living for another 30 years, let's just 40 years. But I would hate for my kids not to be able to have that experience. So could you work on writing a book for us, please, Commissioner Gaither?
I've humbly been asked on several occasions if I could do that, but that's just not my area of giftedness, and some of it. There's sparks of it in the biography.
Yes.
In my biography, Andy. But I can't promise that.
Okay, I'm not going to make a commitment here, but just hear it as a holy encouragement. Like even if you just took your messages through the years, and if somebody took those down for you, I think that would be a gift to the world. And so, if you can allow me to exhort you in that way,
I received the exhortation.
There you go. It's a compliment, and it's a way that God's used you in my life. I remember the first time hearing you preach was when I came to. I think Mark was a student at Asbury when I was visiting, and I heard you there, and dozens of times now, and also just the way here I was my first appointment came while you were national commander, but I just appreciate the personal way that you've connected with me, and even in this call, it's a real gift to me, and I thank you for it. I think others will benefit from it as well.
Well, I'm the receiver of a special gift. You are a gift, and this is not just trying to return your very kind and humbling words, but. I don't say what I do not believe. Mm-hmm. You and Abby are a gift to this movement. The Lord has worked in your lives and placed you just where He needs you. You have a strong voice and presence. Thank God for you and all that you are continually recommitting to Him. Mm-hmm. And I want you to find, I pray, new covenants with our Lord.
Yes.
It'll take you further. We need your voice.
Thank you.
Abby's voice. And you have a responsibility, Andy. You come from a rich heritage, a rich one.
Yes.
Your dad and mom, and, well, you know what your grandfather and grandfather mean to Izzy.
Yes.
He was remarkable. Your mother, as well, strong proponent of this mission. That your dad has a special place in my life. I've served close for just a short while under your father's leadership.
Grandfather, that one, but that's okay.
Or your grandfather.
Yeah,
your grandfather. And just the marvelous way in which, even at a distance, he impacted my life. So you've got a rich heritage there as well.
Thanks for saying
as many
that.
Others, And I think it's important that we remember where we've come from.
Amen.
And
he loved you. My grandpa loved you, and that was very clear. I mean, and he didn't talk about everybody, but he was, and he, in a sense, like you took the same appointment he had, but also served on the Asbury board like he did. And there's many ways that you did, and I know your time in the Eastern Territory together too. There's a lot that ways your paths converge, but it was often something he had a lot of pride in you and the way God was using you and Eva.
God is good. He
yes.
places just, and you know this, you and Abby know this, as we do, very, very strongly. He places us when we're in full surrender and commitment to Him. He places us in the right place.
Yes.
The right places at just the right times, as we serve Him, and we're the benefactor. It's all about grace.
Yes.
It's just about grace. Thank God for that.
Yes.
His grace.
Amen. It's His work, our response.
Yep.
Well, Commissioner, thank you so much for joining me. I know I think I asked you for half an hour, and I took an hour and a half, but I thank you for every moment.
It's gone by very quickly. It's been a privilege and a joy. Thank you so much, Andy.
Yeah.
Bless you. Keep strong, well, safe, and our love to Abby and the children.
Yes, and to Commissioner Eva. All right, God bless you.
Thank you.
Well, I just want to take a moment just to highlight and just recognize how special that hour and a half was to me personally, and I hope it was meaningful to you as well. I didn't anticipate that towards the end of that interview that we would have this pastoral moment. It was almost like I was at the altar, and Commissioner Gaither had his arm around me, and he exhorted me and Abby. And I decided to go ahead and leave that in the interview just so you can know that that's truly what's at the heart of Commissioner Gaither's ministry. And I've experienced that before, but to be able to share that here, I hope can be an example for all of us to try and take the careful approach to our words, but yet prophetic and biblically rooted, pastorally significant moments, just how he started the interview, the careful way he answered the questions. I think it's also important, too, to recognize the very specific way he spoke into these complicated issues, particularly as it relates to racism, his own interracial marriage, and the way he addressed that. You hear grace in those words. I mean, this is just a powerful hour and a half that I had to spend with him. And I think it's also interesting, too, often you might have heard him saying the words truth and justice, and I felt like he was going to add the American way into that. But I mean, even just the way that he highlighted justice. Notice, too, that he didn't necessarily use the word social justice to that, to modify that. I think that's interesting. Now, I think most of the Salvation Army officers and Salvation Army ministry would affirm many of the tenets of what was involved with social justice. I'm sure, obviously, Commissioner Gaither does as well. But yet he chose to use the word justice, which I think is a clear word, and it's a word that's in our articles of faith. Interesting where the word just comes, that says we are justly exposed to the wrath of God. And I just think his words are very particular and sensitive, and I learned so much in that interview, just in the way he interacted with me. Thank you for putting up with me and my bumbling along, trying to kind of respect these holy moments and the very clear action points he gave us. Particularly as we seek to be organizations that respond to issues of injustice, and how we can come along as a community of service. I was encouraged, I was challenged, and I hope that you will be challenged as well by that. And I know I kind of played around with him there at the end, but I'm trying to get him to write a book. I just am so thankful for this unique man, and I'm thankful too for this time that I had together with him. And I hope that it will be a blessing to you. I encourage you to not for the sake of like building up the Tampa Salvation Army's podcast ministry, but I encourage you to share a link to this podcast, because I think these holy moments of where the Holy Spirit was clearly at work could be something that could minister to other people in this time. And this is coming out, right? Still where the concerns involving the killing of Ahmaud Arbery are still very poignant. And so I think that this would be something that God could use to help bring restoration and healing to our country, and particularly as it impacts those who are engaged in the mission of the Salvation Army. Thanks for checking out Captain's Corner and this special interview. I'm so glad that we have opportunity to share it with you. God bless you.